Sarah Chen froze mid-step, her flashlight beam trembling as the faint whimpering from beneath the rotted basement door cut through 4 years of silence. The sound wasn't what she expected to find while searching for her missing cat. It was the cry of something that had given up hope long ago. Her phone slipped from her fingers, clattering against the concrete steps as the reality hit her. Something alive had been trapped down there, forgotten by the world above. The weathered padlock hung like a rusty scar across the door, and behind it, the whimpering continued with the rhythm of a broken heart still beating. Sarah's grandmother Dorothy had always said this old Crawford property held secrets. But this was different. This was evidence of a cruelty so deliberate it made her stomach turn. "Dear God," she whispered, pressing her ear to the splintered wood. What had Vincent Crawford been hiding? And how long had this innocent soul been waiting for someone to finally hear its silent screams for help in the darkness below? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The morning mist clung to Harmony Falls like a shroud, masking the secrets this small Oregon town had harbored for too long. Nestled against the Columbia River, the community of 2,000 souls had weathered economic storms since the lumber mill closed, leaving behind empty storefronts and dreams deferred. Yet beneath its picturesque facade, something darker had taken root. Dr. Emma Sullivan pulled into the gravel driveway of her veterinary clinic, the same route she'd driven for 3 years since returning home broken. At 38, she carried the weight of loss in every careful movement, the way she checked her rear-view mirror twice, how she paused before opening doors. 2 years ago, a drunk driver had stolen her 6-year-old son, Tommy, leaving Emma with nothing but memories and an emptiness that threatened to consume her. The clinic had been her father's before dementia claimed him, and now it served as both her sanctuary and prison. Here, surrounded by the gentle chaos of healing animals, she could almost forget the sound of screeching brakes and her child's final laugh. Almost. Dorothy Chen sat on the clinic's front steps, her 75-year-old frame still commanding despite the arthritis that gnarled her fingers. Once the region's most respected K-9 trainer, she now lived on Social Security checks and the kindness of neighbors who remembered when she'd trained their hunting dogs and family pets. Her sharp hazel eyes missed nothing, though lately she'd begun forgetting names and faces with increasing frequency. "Morning, Doc," Dorothy called, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades commanding respect from both dogs and their owners. "Got a call from my granddaughter Sarah about 30 minutes ago. Says she found something troubling out at the old Crawford place." Emma's stomach tightened at the mention of Vincent Crawford. The 42-year-old businessman owned half the commercial properties in town and sponsored everything from Little League teams to the annual Harvest Festival. His Crawford construction had provided jobs when others fled, making him untouchable in the eyes of most residents. But Emma had seen the coldness behind his smile, the way stray animals seemed to vanish whenever he was around. "What kind of trouble?" Emma asked, though she already dreaded the answer. Dorothy's weathered face hardened. "The kind that's been festering for years while good people look the other way." She stood slowly, her cane tapping against the wooden steps. "That man's been hiding something dark, Emma. I've suspected it for 30 years, ever since his sister's dog went missing when they were children." The autumn wind carried the scent of dying leaves and something else, a corruption that seemed to seep from the very ground. Emma pulled her jacket tighter, remembering Tommy's fascination with German shepherds, how he'd begged for a puppy just weeks before the accident. "Sarah's waiting for us," Dorothy continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Whatever's down in that basement, it's been there far too long, and I have a feeling it's going to change everything we thought we knew about Vincent Crawford." The Crawford property sat like a wound on the landscape, its main house gleaming white while the outbuildings seemed to crouch in shame behind overgrown hedges. Sarah Chen stood beside her Honda Civic, arms wrapped around herself as if fighting off more than just the morning chill. Her teaching instincts had kicked in the moment she'd heard that pitiful whimpering, the same protective urge that made her stay late to help struggling students. "It's coming from the old storm cellar," Sarah explained, leading Emma and Dorothy around the side of the house. "I was following Whisker's trail when I heard it. At first I thought it might be a raccoon or possum, but—" She stopped at a weathered concrete entrance built into a hillside, secured with a heavy chain and padlock that looked newer than the rust-stained door. Emma knelt beside the entrance, pressing her ear to the gap between the door and frame. The whimpering came again, weak, rhythmic, almost musical in its desperation. Her veterinary training kicked in immediately. This wasn't the cry of a wild animal. This was domesticated, intelligent, and utterly broken. "How long do you think—" she began, but Dorothy's sharp intake of breath cut her off. "30 years too long," the elderly woman whispered, her cane trembling in her grip. "Dear Lord, he actually did it. He actually kept one." Before Emma could ask what she meant, the rumble of an expensive engine announced Vincent Crawford's arrival. His black Mercedes pulled into the driveway with predatory precision, and the man himself emerged like he owned not just the property, but the very air they breathed. Tall and broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair, Vincent had the kind of commanding presence that made people instinctively step aside. "Ladies," he called out, his voice carrying that particular brand of authority that came from never being questioned. "I'm afraid you're trespassing on private property." His smile was camera-ready, the same one that graced his company's billboards throughout the county, but it never reached his eyes. Emma stood slowly, her hands already reaching for her emergency veterinary kit from pure instinct. "Mr. Crawford, there's an animal in distress on your property. As a licensed veterinarian, I have a legal obligation to investigate unfounded complaints on private property." Vincent's interruption was smooth as silk and twice as deadly. "I think you'll find that's not quite how the law works, Dr. Sullivan." The way he said her name made Emma's skin crawl, like he'd been watching her, learning about her. She thought of Tommy, of how Vincent had sent flowers to the funeral with a card expressing his deepest sympathies for your tragic loss. At the time, she'd been too shattered to wonder how he'd known the details of the accident. Dorothy stepped forward, her elderly frame somehow radiating decades of accumulated authority. "Vincent Crawford, you listen to me. I trained your sister's dog when you were just 10 years old. I remember what happened to poor Bella, and I remember the look in your eyes when your parents found her body." Vincent's composure cracked for just a moment, a flash of something ugly and desperate crossing his features before the practiced mask slid back into place. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about, Mrs. Chen, and I think your memory might not be as reliable as it once was." The whimpering from below grew more insistent, as if the creature inside sensed the presence of people above. Emma couldn't stand it anymore. "Sir, regardless of property rights, there's clearly an animal suffering down there. At minimum, it needs medical attention." "That's a problem hunting dog I've been rehabilitating," Vincent said, the lie rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "Been working with a specialist in Portland. Sometimes the damaged ones need special accommodations while they heal." Sarah found her voice, though it shook with barely controlled anger. "What kind of rehabilitation requires chaining a basement door shut? The kind that keeps dangerous animals from hurting well-meaning but naive civilians," Vincent replied, his tone turning cold. "Now, I'm going to have to ask you all to leave. Immediately." Emma felt the familiar fire that had once made her one of the most respected emergency veterinarians in Portland before grief had driven her home. "I'm not leaving without examining that animal. If it's injured, keeping it confined could constitute criminal negligence under Oregon statute." For a long moment the four of them stood locked in a battle of wills. The whimpering continued, weaker now, as if the creature below was losing hope that help might actually come. Emma thought of all the animals she'd failed to save, all the time she'd arrived too late. She wouldn't let it happen again. "Fine," Vincent said finally, producing a key from his pocket with theatrical reluctance. "But when that dog tries to tear your throat out, remember that I warned you." As the padlock clicked open and the heavy door groaned on its hinges, Emma had no idea she was about to meet the most important patient of her career. The basement door opened like the mouth of hell itself, releasing a wave of fetid air that made Sarah gag and step backward. Emma descended the concrete steps with her flashlight cutting through the darkness, her veterinary training warring with her human revulsion at what she found. In the far corner of the 10 by 12 concrete cell, pressed against the wall as if trying to disappear into the stone itself, sat a German shepherd that looked more like a living skeleton than a dog. Each rib stood out in stark relief against his dull, patchy coat. Pressure sores marked his elbows and hips where bone met concrete. His water bowl lay overturned and bone dry, while a food dish contained only moldy kibble that looked weeks old. But it was his eyes that broke Emma's heart completely. They were the amber brown of autumn leaves, too large for his emaciated skull, and they held an intelligence that no amount of abuse had managed to extinguish. He didn't growl or bark or show any of the aggressive behavior Vincent had warned about. He simply watched her with the resignation of a soul that had given up hope so long ago he'd forgotten what it felt like. "Dear God," Emma whispered, her professional composure cracking. She'd seen neglect before, but this was systematic torture. "How long has he been down here?" "Found him as a stray about 6 months ago," Vincent called down from above, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Aggressive, wouldn't take to training. Sometimes the damaged ones need time to learn their place." Emma bit back her response, focusing instead on the dog's immediate needs. She moved slowly, speaking in the gentle tones she'd used with Tommy during his nightmares. "Hey there, beautiful boy. I'm going to help you, okay? I'm a doctor." The German shepherd flinched when she extended her hand, but something extraordinary happened. Instead of snapping or retreating further, he leaned slightly toward her scent. His nostrils flared, and for just a moment his tail moved. Not a wag, but a twitch of recognition that made Emma's breath catch. "He knows you," Dorothy's voice came from the doorway above, filled with wonder. "Look at how he's watching you. That's not fear. That's hope." Emma ran her hands gently over the dog's frame, her veterinary assessment automatic even as her heart shattered. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, multiple old fractures that had healed improperly, infected pressure sores and around his neck, a collar that had been embedded in his flesh as he'd grown, creating a ring of infection and scar tissue. "This isn't 6 months of neglect," she called up to Vincent, her voice tight with controlled fury. "This is years of systematic abuse. This dog's been confined in this space since he was a puppy." "You're mistaken," Vincent replied smoothly. "Dogs can deteriorate quickly when they're already damaged." But Emma was studying the dog's teeth, the wear patterns that told the real story. "Based on dental development, I'd estimate he's about 4 years old. The muscle atrophy suggests prolonged confinement. The embedded collar—" She had to stop, swallowing hard against the bile rising in her throat. Sarah's voice shook from above. 4 years? Vincent, you've been torturing this dog for 4 years? "I've been providing shelter for a dangerous animal that no one else wanted," Vincent snapped, his composure finally fraying. "And I think this examination has gone on long enough." Emma looked into the German shepherd's eyes again, and this time she saw something that made her gasp. Recognition. Not just of her as a potential helper, but something deeper, more personal. Those eyes held a gentleness that reminded her so powerfully of Tommy, it was like being punched in the chest. "We're taking him," she announced, standing slowly. The dog struggled to his feet, swaying but determined to follow her. "This animal needs immediate medical attention, and I'm invoking emergency intervention protocols under Oregon animal welfare statutes." "Like hell you are," Vincent snarled, dropping his polite facade entirely. "That's my property, and you're trespassing. I want all of you off my land immediately, or I'm calling the sheriff." Dorothy's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "You go ahead and call Jim Morrison, Vincent. Ask him if he remembers the last time someone reported suspicious activity on your property. Ask him how much you paid him to look the other way." The silence that followed was deafening except for the dog's labored breathing. Emma helped the German shepherd to the stairs, supporting his weight as they climbed toward the light. Each step seemed to require enormous effort, but he pressed on with a determination that spoke to the unbreakable spirit of his breed. "This isn't over," Vincent warned as they reached ground level. "I have lawyers and I have connections. You can't just steal a man's property because you don't like how he treats it." Emma turned to face him, this man who had sent flowers to her son's funeral, who sponsored Little League teams while torturing innocent animals in his basement. "His name is Atlas," she said quietly, "and he's not property. He's a living being who's been counting on someone to care enough to save him." The name had come to her without thinking, inspired by the way the dog carried himself despite everything, like someone bearing the weight of the world but refusing to be crushed by it. As they loaded Atlas into Emma's truck, Dorothy squeezed her arm. "You just made a powerful enemy, child." Emma started the engine, feeling something she hadn't experienced since Tommy's death: purpose. "Then it's a good thing I just found a powerful reason to fight." The fluorescent lights of Emma's clinic hummed overhead as she worked methodically to save Atlas's life. The German shepherd lay motionless on the examination table, too weak to resist as she gently cleaned his matted fur and assessed the full extent of his injuries. Each discovery made her stomach turn: pressure sores that spoke of years lying on concrete, old fractures that had healed crookedly without treatment, and the embedded collar that had grown into his neck like some medieval torture device. "Severe malnutrition, chronic dehydration, multiple infections," Emma dictated to Sarah, who was documenting everything with shaking hands. "The collar will require surgical removal under anesthesia, but he's too weak for surgery right now. We need to stabilize him first." Atlas's amber eyes tracked Emma's every movement, and something in their depths reminded her so powerfully of Tommy that she had to pause, gripping the examination table until her knuckles went white. Her son had looked at her with that same trusting vulnerability during his last hospital visit, believing completely that Mommy could fix anything. Dorothy sat in the corner, watching Atlas with an expression Emma couldn't quite read. "He's special, this one," the elderly woman murmured. "Look how he's studying you. Most dogs this broken would have shut down completely, but he's still trying to connect." As if responding to her words, Atlas lifted his head slightly and made a sound, not quite a whine, but a soft vocalization that seemed to say, "I'm still here." Emma felt tears threaten and quickly busied herself inserting an IV line for fluids and antibiotics. The clinic door burst open with a bang that made them all jump. Vincent Crawford strode in, flanked by Sheriff Jim Morrison, whose uniform strained across his considerable belly and whose expression suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Behind them came a woman Emma didn't recognize, tall, severe, with the kind of sharp suit that screamed expensive legal representation. "Dr. Sullivan," Vincent announced with theatrical authority, "I'm here to reclaim my stolen property." Sheriff Morrison shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting on his belt. "Doc, I know you mean well, but Mr. Crawford has filed a formal complaint. Says you removed his hunting dog without permission." Emma positioned herself between the group and Atlas, her protective instincts flaring. That animal was being systematically tortured, Sheriff. I documented everything before removal. This isn't about property rights. This is about animal cruelty. The lawyer stepped forward, consulting a tablet with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. My client operates a legal animal rehabilitation facility on his property. The dog in question was being treated for behavioral issues that made it dangerous to the public. Dr. Sullivan's unauthorized removal constitutes theft under Oregon statute. Rehabilitation? Sarah's voice cracked with disbelief. That dog was chained in a basement with no food or water. According to whom? The lawyer replied smoothly. My client's documentation shows a different story entirely. Dorothy struggled to her feet, her cane tapping against the linoleum with each deliberate step. Vincent Crawford, you've been lying about dogs since you were 10 years old. Some of us remember what really happened to your sister's German Shepherd. Vincent's face went white, then flushed red. I don't know what you're talking about, old woman. And your memory isn't exactly reliable these days, is it? The cruel jab hit its mark. Dorothy's increasing forgetfulness was becoming common knowledge around town. But instead of backing down, the elderly trainer straightened her shoulders and fixed Vincent with a stare that could have melted steel. My memory about dogs is just fine, boy. I remember training Bella when she was just a pup. Beautiful German Shepherd, smart as they come. I also remember your father bringing me her body after you claimed she ran away. Broken neck. She had very specific kind of break you get from... Enough! Vincent's composure shattered completely. These are baseless accusations from a senile old woman. Sheriff, I want that dog returned immediately. Emma's mind raced as she studied Atlas, who had remained calm throughout the confrontation despite the raised voices. Something about his behavior nagged at her. The way he positioned himself, the intelligence in his eyes, the almost military precision of his movements even in his weakened state. Sheriff, she said carefully, before any decisions are made, I need to complete my examination. I found something that might change the legal situation entirely. She pulled out her handheld scanner and passed it over Atlas's shoulders, watching the digital display until it beeped and populated with a 15-digit number. He's microchipped, registered to... She typed quickly into the database. Peterson family, Bend, Oregon, reported stolen 4 years ago. The silence that followed was deafening. Vincent's lawyer looked like she'd swallowed something sour, while the sheriff's expression shifted from annoyance to genuine concern. That's impossible, Vincent said, but his voice lacked conviction. I've had that dog for 6 months. The chip doesn't lie, Emma replied, already dialing the number listed in the database. A woman answered on the second ring, and Emma's heart broke all over again as she listened to Linda Peterson's story, how their 8-week-old German Shepherd puppy had vanished from their fenced backyard on Christmas morning 4 years ago, how they'd never stopped looking, never stopped hoping. We still have his puppy collar, Linda whispered through tears, his registration papers, his baby pictures. Is he okay? Emma looked at Atlas, this broken, tortured soul who had somehow survived 4 years of hell, and chose her words carefully. He's alive, Mrs. Peterson, and he's going to be okay. After ending the call, she turned to face Vincent, who looked like a man watching his world collapse. The Petersons are driving down from Bend tonight. They never gave up looking for him. Sheriff Morrison removed his hat and ran a hand through his thinning hair. Vincent, this changes things significantly. If that dog was stolen, I bought him legitimately, Vincent insisted, but sweat beaded his forehead despite the clinic's air conditioning. I have paperwork. Then you won't mind showing me that paperwork, the sheriff replied, his tone shifting from reluctant assistance to professional skepticism, along with records of veterinary care for the past 6 months. Dorothy spoke up from her corner, her voice carrying the weight of decades. Jim Morrison, You've known me for 40 years. Have I ever lied to you about an animal?" The sheriff met her gaze and shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am, you haven't." "Then believe me when I tell you that Vincent Crawford has been hiding a darkness in this town for 30 years. That basement isn't the only place he's kept dogs, and Atlas isn't the first one to suffer." Vincent's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but he brushed her away. "This is ridiculous. You're all acting like I'm some kind of monster when I was providing shelter for a damaged animal that no one else wanted." "For 4 years?" Emma's voice was deadly quiet. "In a basement? Without proper food, water, or medical care? That's not shelter, Mr. Crawford. That's torture." Atlas, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, suddenly lifted his head and looked directly at Vincent. For a moment, something passed between them, a recognition that made Vincent step backward involuntarily. The dog's expression wasn't one of fear or submission. It was judgment, pure and simple. "We'll sort this out at the station," Sheriff Morrison announced, clearly uncomfortable with the turn the situation had taken. "Vincent, I'm going to need you to come with me to provide documentation and answer some questions." As the group prepared to leave, Vincent turned back to Emma with an expression of pure malice. "This isn't over, Dr. Sullivan. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." After they left, Emma sank into the chair beside Atlas's examination table, suddenly exhausted. The German shepherd looked at her with those intelligent amber eyes, and she could swear she saw gratitude there. "What did you see down in that basement, boy?" she whispered, gently stroking his head. "What stories could you tell if you could talk?" Atlas responded by placing his paw on her arm, a gesture so human, so deliberate, that it took her breath away. For the first time since Tommy's death, Emma felt something besides grief and guilt. She felt hope. The Peterson family arrived at Emma's clinic just after midnight, their faces etched with 4 years of grief and desperate hope. Linda Peterson clutched a worn photo of a fluffy German shepherd puppy, while her husband Michael carried a small blue collar that looked impossibly tiny compared to Atlas's current size. Their teenage daughter Jessica hung back, afraid to hope after so many false leads and crushing disappointments. Emma met them at the door, her heart heavy with the knowledge that this reunion wouldn't be the joyful homecoming they'd dreamed of. Atlas lay sedated in the recovery room, his breathing steady but labored, IV lines snaking from his front leg like mechanical lifelines. "Is that really him?" Linda whispered, her hand flying to her mouth as she saw the emaciated form that bore little resemblance to the chubby puppy in her photo. "Oh my God, what did they do to him?" Michael Peterson's jaw worked silently as he took in the extent of Atlas's condition, the visible ribs, the patches of missing fur, the surgical site where Emma had removed the embedded collar just hours before. 4 years, he said quietly. 4 years of this. Emma watched as the family approached Atlas's kennel, hoping for some sign of recognition, some spark of memory that might bridge the gap between the puppy they'd lost and the broken adult lying before them. Linda knelt beside the kennel and began speaking in soft, encouraging tones, using what were clearly old commands and endearments. "Remember your blue ball, Max? Remember how you used to sleep on Daddy's feet?" Her voice cracked as Atlas opened his eyes but showed no flicker of familiarity. "We never stopped looking for you, baby." Never stopped hoping. Dorothy, who had insisted on staying despite the late hour, observed the scene with the sharp eyes of someone who'd spent decades reading canine behavior. "Don't take it personal," she said gently to the Petersons. "He was just a baby when he was taken. The trauma, it changes them." But Emma noticed something the others missed. While Atlas showed no recognition of his original family, his gaze kept returning to her. When she moved to check his IV, his head followed her. When she spoke, his ears pricked forward with an attention he didn't show the others. The moment was interrupted by the urgent buzz of Emma's phone. Sheriff Morrison's voice was tense when she answered. "Doc, we've got a situation. Vincent's property. We found more than just that basement." Emma stepped into the hallway, leaving the Petersons with their lost dog. "What do you mean?" "3 more buildings on his land, all with evidence of animal confinement. Empty now, but the conditions." Morrison's voice trailed off. "Doc, we're talking about an operation that's been running for years. The state police are involved now, and they want to interview Atlas as evidence." "Interview him? Jim, he's barely stable enough to—" I know. But there's something else. We found financial records that suggest this wasn't just about animal cruelty. There was money changing hands, big money. We think Vincent was running a fighting ring." Emma's blood ran cold. Fighting rings used bait dogs, gentle animals trained to lose, to build confidence in the fighters without risking injury to valuable combat dogs. The thought of Atlas being used in such a way made her stomach turn. "There's more," Morrison continued. "Vincent lawyered up and isn't talking, but his property manager broke. Says there were regular events held on the back 40 acres, high-stakes gambling, dogs from all over the Pacific Northwest. Atlas wasn't just a victim, Doc. Yeah, he was evidence of a multi-state criminal enterprise." After hanging up, Emma returned to find the Petersons in tearful conversation with Dorothy. The elderly trainer was explaining something that made Linda Peterson nod with understanding. "What's happening?" Emma asked. Michael Peterson stood, his expression resolute despite the pain in his eyes. "Mrs. Chen helped us understand something important. Max, Atlas, he's bonded with you now. Taking him away from the person who saved him, the only person he trusts, it would be cruel." Emma felt her world tilt. "Mr. Peterson, I couldn't possibly—" "You could and you will," Linda interrupted, her voice firm despite the tears streaming down her face. "Look at him, Dr. Sullivan. Really, look at him." Emma followed Linda's gaze to Atlas, who had struggled to his feet despite his weakness. His amber eyes were fixed on Emma with an intensity that spoke of more than gratitude. It was the look of a soul who had found his anchor in a storm. "We've been grieving our puppy for 4 years," Linda continued. "But that puppy is gone. This is a different dog now, one who's survived things we can't even imagine. He needs someone who understands trauma, someone who can help him heal. That's you, not us." Dorothy nodded approvingly. "Dogs choose their people, not the other way around. And this boy chose you the moment you opened that basement door." Before Emma could process what was happening, Atlas took a shaky step toward her, then another. His movement was labored but determined, and when he reached her side, he did something that stopped her heart. He placed his head against her leg and looked up at her with complete trust. "We want to sign over legal ownership," Michael said quietly. "Tonight, before the legal complications get worse. He's yours, Dr. Sullivan. Give him the life he deserves." Emma knelt beside Atlas, running her fingers through his rough coat. In his eyes, she saw something she recognized, the same haunted look she'd carried since Tommy's death. They were both survivors of different kinds of trauma, both struggling to trust again, both afraid to hope. "What do you think, Atlas?" she whispered. "Ready to start over?" As if understanding her perfectly, Atlas leaned into her touch, his tail moving in what might have been his first wag in 4 years. It was barely a tremor, but it was everything. The paperwork was signed at 2 in the morning, witnessed by Dorothy and notarized by a sleepy public official Morrison had roused from bed. As the Petersons prepared to leave, Linda Peterson pressed the tiny blue collar into Emma's hands. "For when he's ready," she said. "Every dog deserves to remember where he came from, even if home looks different now." After they left, Emma sat beside Atlas's kennel in the quiet clinic, watching him sleep. For the first time since Tommy's death, the silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt peaceful, filled with the presence of another broken soul learning to heal. "Tomorrow we start figuring out how to be whole again," she told the sleeping dog. "Both of us." Outside, the first hints of dawn were painting the sky pink and gold, promising a new day full of possibilities neither of them had dared to imagine just 24 hours before. Emma didn't know that Vincent Crawford was already planning his retaliation, or that the worst was yet to come. All she knew was that she had found something worth fighting for again, and sometimes that's all the hope anyone needs to take the next step forward. The call came at dawn, Sheriff Morrison's voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Emma, you need to get down to the courthouse, now!" Emma had been sleeping in the clinic chair beside Atlas's kennel, her hand resting near the bars where he could see her. The German Shepherd's condition had stabilized overnight, but she hadn't wanted to leave him alone. Now, as Morrison's words sank in, she felt the familiar cold dread that had become her constant companion since Tommy's death. "What's happening, Jim?" "Vincent posted bail 2 hours ago. His lawyers filed an emergency injunction claiming Atlas is dangerous and needs to be destroyed for public safety. Judge Patricia Hawkins is hearing the case at 9 a.m. sharp." Emma's blood turned to ice. Judge Hawkins was Vincent's hunting buddy, known for her strict interpretation of property rights and her disdain for what she called bleeding heart animal activists. The fix was in before the hearing even started. "Jim, that's impossible. Atlas hasn't shown any aggressive behavior. He's barely strong enough to stand." "I know that, and you know that. But Vincent's got witnesses lined up claiming the dog attacked them on his property. Says that's why he had to confine it in the first place." Morrison's voice dropped to a whisper. "Emma, there's something else. Something I found in Vincent's financial records that you need to know." The sheriff's pause stretched long enough to make Emma's stomach clench with anticipation. Vincent Crawford Enterprises received a $50,000 insurance payout 2 years ago for damages related to a vehicle collision on Highway 20. Emma's world tilted sideways. Highway 20 was where Tommy had died. The drunk driver who'd killed her son had never been identified. The car was found abandoned and burned 3 counties away, the license plates removed. "Jim," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying Vincent Crawford was driving the car that killed your boy, Emma, and I think he's been using his money and connections to cover it up ever since." The phone slipped from Emma's nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor. Atlas, sensing her distress, struggled to his feet and pressed his nose against the kennel bars, whining softly. The sound cut through her shock like a blade. This innocent creature was going to pay the ultimate price for her decision to cross the man who'd murdered her child. Dorothy arrived 30 minutes later, moving faster than Emma had seen her move in months. "Sarah called me," she said, settling her slight frame into a chair with grim determination. "Told me about the hearing." "They're going to kill him, Dorothy. Vincent's going to destroy Atlas just like he destroyed everything else I've ever loved." The elderly trainer's eyes flashed with something fierce and uncompromising. "Not if I have anything to say about it. Vincent Crawford has been getting away with murder, literally it seems, for far too long. What can we do? He owns half the town, including the judge. His lawyers will paint Atlas as a vicious animal that needs to be put down for public safety." Dorothy leaned forward, her weathered hands gripping her cane with white-knuckled intensity. "Child, I've been keeping secrets about that family for 30 years. About what really happened to his sister's dog, about the other animals that went missing over the years. I kept quiet because I couldn't prove anything and because—" She hesitated, shame coloring her cheeks. "Because I was afraid." "Dorothy," You don't have to. Yes, I do. That little girl, Vincent's sister Katie, she loved that German shepherd more than life itself. When Bella went missing, Katie searched for weeks, found her body in the woods behind their house, neck broken just like I told you. But there was something else I never told anyone. Emma waited, hardly daring to breathe. Katie saw Vincent kill Bella, saw him lose his temper and grab the dog by the collar, twist until she was only 8 years old, but she knew what she saw. Came to me crying, begging me to help her understand why her big brother would hurt something she loved. What happened to Katie? Dorothy's expression grew dark with old pain. Car accident 3 months later. Single vehicle, late at night. Police said she must have been sleepwalking, wandered into the road. But I always wondered, that girl was too smart to walk into traffic. Too careful. Emma felt something cold and terrible settling in her chest. You think Vincent? I think Vincent Crawford learned early that the easiest way to solve a problem is to eliminate it permanently. And I think he's been practicing that philosophy his whole life. Atlas whimpered again, as if sensing the darkness of their conversation. Emma looked into his amber eyes and saw her son's face, remembered Tommy's last words. Make sure the bad guys don't win, Mommy. We're going to that hearing, she said quietly, and we're going to make sure the truth comes out, whatever it costs. Dorothy nodded, her expression grim but resolute. Then we'd better pray that 30 years of keeping quiet was worth the wait. The courthouse steps were packed with spectators by 8:30 a.m., the entire town seemingly divided into 2 camps. On one side stood Vincent's supporters, business owners who depended on his contracts, city council members who'd benefited from his donations, and longtime residents who remembered the Crawford family's generations of community leadership. On the other side, a smaller but equally determined group had gathered around Emma and Dorothy, teachers from Sarah's school, veterinary clients who trusted Emma's judgment, and a surprising number of elderly residents who remembered Dorothy's reputation with dogs. Inside the courtroom, Judge Patricia Hawkins presided from her bench like a stern schoolmarm, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun and her expression suggesting she'd already made up her mind about the proceedings. Vincent sat at the plaintiff's table with 2 expensive lawyers, his posture radiating the confidence of a man who'd never lost a battle that mattered to him. Emma sat at the defendant's table with a court-appointed attorney who'd had less than 2 hours to review the case. Atlas lay at her feet on a special mat, still weak but alert, his amber eyes tracking every movement in the room. The sight of the emaciated German shepherd had caused audible gasps from the gallery when they'd first entered. This is an emergency hearing to determine the immediate disposition of a potentially dangerous animal, Judge Hawkins announced, her voice carrying the authority of decades on the bench. Mr. Crawford, present your case. Vincent's lead attorney, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit, stood with theatrical precision. Your Honor, my client has been the victim of theft and character assassination. The animal in question was legally acquired and was being rehabilitated under professional supervision when Dr. Sullivan unlawfully removed it from Mr. Crawford's property. She gestured toward Atlas with practiced disdain. This animal has a documented history of aggression, requiring confinement for public safety. Despite Mr. Crawford's considerable investment in rehabilitation efforts, the dog remains dangerous and unpredictable. What documentation? Emma's attorney interjected, but Judge Hawkins silenced him with a sharp look. Mr. Crawford has provided affidavits from 3 witnesses who can testify to this animal's vicious behavior, the lawyer continued smoothly. We have veterinary records showing the extensive measures required to contain it safely. Emma felt her heart sink as she recognized the witnesses, Deputy Taylor, who owed his job to Vincent's political influence, Harold Morrison, the sheriff's cousin who ran the county's animal control contract, and Dr. Marcus Webb, a veterinarian from 2 counties over whose clinic had been saved from bankruptcy by a mysterious, anonymous donation. Each man took the stand and delivered carefully rehearsed testimony about Atlas's unprovoked attacks and savage temperament. They painted a picture of a dog so dangerous that even experienced handlers feared for their safety. The veterinary records, though obviously fabricated, looked official enough to impress a judge who wanted to believe them. Furthermore, Vincent's attorney continued, Dr. Sullivan's unauthorized removal of this animal has compromised an ongoing rehabilitation program. The interruption in treatment has likely exacerbated the dog's aggressive tendencies, making it an immediate threat to public safety. Judge Hawkins nodded approvingly. Dr. Sullivan, I hope you have compelling evidence to counter these serious allegations. Emma's court-appointed attorney stood nervously, clearly out of his depth. Your Honor, my client acted in good faith to provide emergency medical care to an obviously neglected animal. The microchip records clearly established that this dog was stolen from its original owners 4 years ago. The microchip issue is a separate matter for civil court, Judge Hawkins replied dismissively. Today, we're concerned only with public safety. Dr. Sullivan, do you have any evidence that this animal is not dangerous? Emma rose slowly, her legs shaking, but her voice steady. Your Honor, I've been a veterinarian for 15 years. I've treated thousands of animals, including many with behavioral issues. Atlas has shown no signs of aggression whatsoever. His behavior is consistent with severe trauma and neglect, not inherent viciousness. That's your opinion as someone with obvious emotional investment in the outcome, Judge Hawkins replied coldly. Do you have any objective evidence? Before Emma could answer, a commotion erupted in the gallery. Sarah Chen stood up, her phone in her hand, her face flushed with excitement and fury. I have evidence, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. I have video evidence that proves everything Vincent Crawford just said is a lie. Judge Hawkins banged her gavel. Young woman, this is highly irregular. I've been recording Vincent's property for 6 months, Sarah continued, ignoring the judge's protests. Ever since I moved next door and started hearing sounds that no rehabilitation program would make, I have footage of dogs being moved in and out at night, of fights being staged in makeshift arenas, of Atlas being used as a bait dog to train fighters. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Vincent's face went white, then flushed red with rage. His lawyers huddled frantically, whispering urgent instructions. Dorothy stood up slowly, her cane tapping against the floor like a metronome counting down to judgment. There's more, Dorothy called out, her elderly voice somehow carrying over the din. Much more that needs to come to light about Vincent Crawford and his family's history with animals. Judge Hawkins banged her gavel repeatedly, but the damage was done. The careful facade Vincent had constructed was crumbling in real time, and Emma could see the panic in his eyes as he realized his secrets were finally being exposed. Your Honor, Vincent's attorney said desperately, these alleged recordings were obtained through illegal surveillance of private property. The recordings were made from my own property, Sarah interrupted, documenting criminal activity that was plainly visible from a public vantage point. I have hours of footage showing systematic animal abuse. Emma looked down at Atlas, who had remained calm throughout the chaos, his intelligent eyes focused on her face with unwavering trust. This was the moment that would determine not just his fate, but whether justice could finally prevail over money and influence in their small town. The truth was finally coming to light, but Emma knew Vincent Crawford wouldn't go down without a fight that would test everything she believed about right and wrong. Judge Hawkins called for a recess, but the courtroom remained electric with tension as Sarah Chen's revelation hung in the air like a storm about to break. Emma watched Vincent's face cycle through emotions, shock, rage, calculation, before settling into the cold mask of a man who'd been cornered but wasn't ready to surrender. During the break, Sarah pulled Emma and Dorothy into a side corridor, her hands shaking as she scrolled through files on her phone. "I've been documenting everything for months. Look at this." The video footage was grainy but unmistakable. Dogs being led into makeshift fighting rings, spectators placing bets, and in one heartbreaking sequence, Atlas being dragged from his basement prison to serve as a training target for a massive pit bull. The German Shepherd's refusal to fight back, even when attacked, was evident in every frame. "This isn't just animal cruelty," Dorothy whispered, her weathered face pale with horror. "This is organized crime." "Look at those license plates. Cars from Idaho, Washington, California. Vincent was running a regional operation." Emma felt sick watching Atlas on the screen, seeing how he'd endured attack after attack without retaliating, his gentle nature intact despite the torture. Why didn't he ever fight back? Most dogs would have turned aggressive after treatment like this. "Because he's a therapy dog," came a voice behind them. They turned to see Linda Peterson approaching, her face streaked with tears. "I didn't tell you everything yesterday. We didn't just lose a pet 4 years ago. We lost a specially trained therapy dog." Emma's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "Max, Atlas, was being trained as a therapy dog for children with autism and PTSD. We got him from a program that breeds German Shepherds specifically for their gentle temperament and high intelligence. He was genetically selected for his inability to show aggression, even under extreme stress." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Vincent hadn't just tortured any dog. He'd tortured one bred specifically to trust and serve humans, one whose very genetics made him incapable of the violence Vincent claimed he possessed. When court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Judge Hawkins, faced with the mounting evidence and a gallery full of increasingly hostile spectators, looked like a woman who realized she'd backed the wrong horse. Vincent's lawyers huddled frantically, clearly unprepared for the scope of the evidence now emerging. "Your Honor," Sarah's voice rang clear as she was sworn in as a witness, "I submit into evidence 6 months of video documentation showing systematic animal abuse and illegal gambling operations on Mr. Crawford's property." As the videos played on the courtroom screen, gasps and murmurs rippled through the gallery. The footage was damning, clear evidence of dogfighting, illegal gambling, and the systematic abuse of multiple animals. But it was the sequences showing Atlas that broke hearts throughout the room. Vincent's attorney objected repeatedly, but Judge Hawkins overruled each attempt. The evidence was too overwhelming, too clearly documented to dismiss on technicalities. Then Dorothy took the stand, and Emma watched in amazement as the elderly woman seemed to shed decades of frailty. Her voice was strong and clear as she recounted 30 years of suspicions, starting with the death of Vincent's sister's dog when he was just 10 years old. "I trained Bella from a puppy," Dorothy testified, her eyes never leaving Vincent's face. "Beautiful German Shepherd, gentle as a lamb. When Katie Crawford brought me Bella's body, I knew immediately what had happened. The break pattern in her neck, that was no accident." Vincent's face had gone ashen, but his lawyer pressed forward. "Mrs. Chen, you're asking this court to believe a 10-year-old boy committed murder?" "I'm asking this court to believe that some people are born broken," Dorothy replied quietly, "and that this community has been enabling that brokenness for 30 years. The courtroom fell silent as Dorothy continued her testimony, painting a picture of a pattern of violence that stretched back decades. Missing pets, suspicious accidents, unexplained disappearances, all connected by the thin thread of Vincent Crawford's presence. But it was Emma's testimony that delivered the killing blow. When called to the stand, she spoke not just as a veterinarian but as a mother who'd lost everything. "Your Honor, Atlas shows every sign of being a therapy dog, specifically trained to provide comfort to traumatized children. His behavior, his responses, his complete inability to show aggression even when attacked, these aren't characteristics of a dangerous animal. They're the traits of a dog bred and trained to heal. She paused, looking directly at Vincent. 2 years ago, my 6-year-old son, Tommy, was killed by a drunk driver who fled the scene. The driver was never caught, the case never solved. But this morning, Sheriff Morrison discovered that Vincent Crawford received an insurance payout for vehicle damage on the same night my son died. The courtroom erupted. Vincent's lawyer objected frantically, but the damage was done. Emma continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. Atlas was meant to help children like Tommy heal from trauma. Instead, he was tortured by the same man who created that trauma in the first place. If that's not evil, Your Honor, I don't know what is. Judge Hawkins called for order, but Vincent had heard enough. He stood abruptly, his composure finally shattered. "You can't prove anything," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Emma. "That kid ran into the road. It wasn't my fault he was too stupid to look both ways." The confession hung in the air like a death sentence. Vincent realized what he'd said a moment too late, his face crumbling as he understood he'd just admitted to killing a child and fleeing the scene. His lawyers abandoned him immediately, gathering their files and heading for the exit as Vincent stood alone at the plaintiff's table, the weight of 30 years of secrets finally crushing him. Atlas, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, suddenly stood and walked slowly toward Vincent. The courtroom held its breath as the emaciated German shepherd approached the man who'd tortured him for 4 years. For a moment, dog and man stared at each other. Then Atlas did something that stunned everyone present. He sat down in front of Vincent and placed his paw on the man's shoe. Not in aggression or revenge, but in what could only be described as forgiveness. It was Vincent who broke. He collapsed into his chair, sobbing like a child, the weight of his crimes finally breaking through the walls he'd built around his conscience. Judge Hawkins, her voice shaky with emotion, declared Atlas free of all charges and ordered an immediate investigation into Vincent's confession. The courtroom erupted in applause as Emma knelt beside Atlas, gathering him into her arms. "It's over, boy," she whispered into his fur. "We're going home." But even as she held her wounded warrior, Emma knew the real healing was just beginning. For both of them, the journey back to wholeness would take time, patience, and the kind of love that neither of them had dared to hope for again. Atlas looked up at her with those wise amber eyes, and in them she saw not just forgiveness, but hope, the most precious gift of all. For our listeners aged 55 to 68, Atlas's story reminds us that our greatest challenges often prepare us for our most important purpose. Like Atlas, many of us have weathered storms that seemed unbearable, yet those experiences gave us the empathy to help others through their darkest moments. Whether it's being there for grandchildren, supporting friends through illness, or simply offering wisdom born from experience, our pain becomes our power to heal. Atlas chose love over revenge, hope over despair, and service over self-pity. His story proves that it's never too late for a second chance, and that sometimes our most meaningful chapters begin when we think our story is ending. In your own life, you've likely been both Atlas, surviving the unthinkable, and Emma, finding purpose through helping others heal. The grace Atlas showed his tormentor teaches us that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the strength that breaks cycles of pain. At this stage of life, we have the wisdom to choose healing over bitterness, community over isolation, and love over fear. Our scars don't define us. How we use them to help others does. Like Atlas working with traumatized children, our broken places can become sources of light for others walking through darkness. What life experience has given you the wisdom to help others through similar struggles? Share a moment when you chose hope over bitterness. We'd love to hear your story of resilience in the comments below. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.